I think you are flirting here with an all-out war that we will all engage in it. Each side will affirm to the other that they won't use nuclear weapons, and then one of them will, and then it's over. And for me, that's a bluff I don't want to see anyone call. I think that's crazy. And here I'll put on my hat as an American citizen. I don't want to jeopardize all that the world has achieved over the dispute of the border between Russia and Ukraine on the one hand, or the way in which the Palestinians and the Israelis need to share that corner of the world where they are located. We're fighting over real estate. Are we really going to jeopardize everything for that? I find that an argument that makes me question the person's sanity. And I am very confident in telling you, beyond what the polls already show us, and I mean Gallup and the others, that the majority of Americans and Europeans will not go there, and they will abandon leaders who take them there. Let me give you an example. Something very strange happened this summer in France. A core member of NATO had a national election. One of the big issues there, Ukraine. Another big issue there, Israel. A new coalition of left-wing parties fielded a unified candidate for the national parliament. It's called the New Popular Front. It is a combination of the French Communist Party, the French Socialist Party, the French Green Party, and the largest of the four, France Unbowed. These are all political parties that are critical of capitalism. They got the largest number of votes. They are the largest bloc in the Assemblée Nationale, which is the Parliament of France. Hello, folks. Pay some attention. They did that because the French people wanted to send a message. If you add the left wing that won to the party of the extreme right, Marine Le Pen, then Mr. Macron, the sitting president, his party in the first round of the election came in third out of three. He's done. He's got as much of a political future as you and I do. And I don't mean any disrespect to you. But I think what you're seeing there is what you're going to see much more of. This is not particularly partisan in the sense of assessing the rights and wrongs of Israel and Palestine, or of Russia and Ukraine. I'm not a propagandistic. I'm not going to tell you one of them is the great one and the other one is the bad. I'm not interested in that. I'm telling you that these conflicts are not worth the anxiety of the world, which is what they have provoked. And eventually the rest of the world, and I don't think it'll take long, is going to say so. And these issues are going to be forced to be settled because the maximum force of the world is going to look on all of this as intolerable to allow to go further. We have posturing and propagandizing that doesn't recognize itself for what it is. Let me give you a couple of examples to drive the point home. The United States invaded Vietnam. The United States invaded Afghanistan. The United States invaded Iraq. It then denounced Mr. Putin for invading the Ukraine. Now, I believe countries should not invade each other. But for the United States to say it's outrageous that Mr. Putin does what they themselves just did makes you realize that there's something going on here that has nothing to do with the ostensible language and propaganda that's being pushed here. Israel can point to outrageous things Palestinians have done and vice versa. Stop. This is not going anywhere. We have to deal with the problems, not pile on blame games. It doesn't help the situation. The reality is you're now flirting with whole-scale war, nuclear war to boot. No one knows exactly if the Israelis have the bombs. They probably do, and they probably have at least some capacity to throw them around the world. That's scary. Russia, we know, has that capacity. Iran may have that capacity. Probably not. Western Europe does. India, China do. This is crazy what we are doing. As a species, it's nuts. And there's enough common sense to be able at a certain point to say, stop. And the only mobilization that will work is a mobilization of the mass of people. Otherwise, Mr. Putin won't stop, and Mr. Netanyahu won't stop, and none of them. And Mr. Zelensky's in New York presenting a victory plan. I mean, I'm not going to laugh, but, this is the guy who's on his back, having been knocked out 14 times, wobbly on his feet, talking to the guy who knocked him out, saying, well, I'm going to beat you now. Well, don't look like it unless you get what? The right to send missiles into the heart of Russia. We thought at the end of the Second World War, as a planet, we had just gone through World War I, then a few years later, World War II, the most devastating wars in the history of the world. We're going to create, after World War I, we tried something called the League of Nations. After World War II, we created the UN, the United Nations. It's clear what we're trying to do is to have something totally of the planet to stop all the little conflicts from becoming what they are becoming. As the leaders of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres has to admit it hasn't worked out real well. As I look around, we had better get together to make it work or else. Are we a declining empire or losing hegemony? I think the answer to that is a clear, obvious yes. And the efforts like in Ukraine or in Israel are the efforts of a declining empire, directly or indirectly, to hold on, which I understand, and I even have a certain empathy with it. We remember empires when they achieve their great monuments, the things that still stand, that we can see, or the great civilizational achievements. Yeah, but when they went down, it was very ugly. It was very violent. Here's how I see where the thing stands. There is right now in the world a candidate to be the next global empire after the Dutch and the French and the British and the American. And I think it's real clear, even though a lot of people have trouble facing it. It's the People's Republic of China. And I think for them, they are going to have to decide, along with the rest of the world, whether the next phase will be another empire, such as theirs, or whether multipolarity may become an accepted way to create the basis so that a League of Nations or a United Nations can actually do what we all hoped it would do. Look, we could have spent the last 300 years with Nebraska going to war against South Carolina in an alliance with New Hampshire. We don't have that. We've had a lot of conflicts, a lot now right away, but we've managed. I don't understand any reason to believe we can't do a comparable piece of work internationally that we managed to do nationally. I even take a certain solace from social media, from the internet, as providing us with much of the technical infrastructure to make that possible. And that's where we ought to go, because the alternative, the decline of an empire with the kind of horror show that it is now showing us it portends for us, ought to be enough of a stimulus to make the effort. And it's always been an effort. It was an effort to build the United States. It took 2 wars with Britain to even get the space to make the effort. We can do that. And I think there's an agreement more and more around the world that this is the direction we need to go. I want the United States to be a leader. Okay, maybe I can't get that, but don't be an obstacle to the efforts of working these things out into a multipolar. Go quietly to the end of your empire. Don't do stuff that risks taking us all down with you. I think the United Nations has done lots and lots of very good things, including shortening or avoiding wars here, there, and the other. Where the United Nations, in my judgment, has failed is when you have a major power determined to go in a different direction. They lack the ability to do much about it. If one of the 5 countries in the Security Council uses the veto that it has, well, the UN is then stymied. And whether it's been Russia or China on the one hand, or the United States, Britain, and France on the other, when those vetoes have been applied or threatened, they have to solve that glaring failure. What Hamas did there was horrible. I understand the history out of which it comes. What Israelis did was much more horrible, but I also understand the anxieties, the insecurity, and the history out of which it comes. Well, all I'm arguing is that we have plenty of models, not just in the United States, but in other parts of the world, where different regions have been able, after many experiences of violence and warfare, to resolve most of their questions in a peaceful way within a framework set up to do that. You lose some, you win some, there's compromise, all the usual effort. Can that be broken up? Yeah, there's no guarantees one way or the other. But that's where we ought to be going. We ought to be trying. And the fact that we didn't succeed with the League of Nations and the fact ditto for the UN shouldn't obscure the things that they did achieve and shouldn't obscure the value of trying to do it better. Again, let me remind, I'm talking in a society where, for example, our political candidates, they never hesitate to tell you that no matter how many failures they've had in some policy they support, if you only did more of it, you would have had a different outcome. And, you have to argue that point. When I rattled off the defeats of the United States, I assume you know what the normal response is. The normal response of most Americans when they hear that is to say, well, we could have won if only we were willing to do. That misunderstands that every war in the world can be described that way. The loser might have or could have or should have, but they didn't. And in the end, that's the reality we have to live with, and that's the reality we ought to think from. We couldn't for all kinds of reasons, and those reasons haven't gone away. We can't now either. We can't recover from a nuclear war. Or let me put it this way. I don't want to make that effort, and I don't see any reason that justifies taking that chance. For the first time in a century, this country has an economic competitor. I cannot overstress that. The British Empire, out of which the U.S. grew, that empire is now gone. It exists only in the comic books, in the inauguration of new kings of England. We, for a century, had the economic power, dominance to be the kind of threat of a big stick. We don't have that anymore. The People's Republic of China matches U.S. technological advances step by step, if not going ahead in certain areas already. The GDP of the United States is now about $25 trillion. The GDP of Russia right now is $2 trillion. There is no economic competition from Russia. The GDP of China is $18 trillion. You can't be the political, military, dominant stick carrier. Too many other people have too many roads of access. It's over, like your empire. The two go hand in hand. You better come up with a better plan. Let me put it as sharply as I know. If the United States doesn't become a leader in groping its way towards multilateral government, the best prognosis I can give you is somebody else will, and that will leave the United States in a far worse position.
Based on Richard Wolff's interview, here are the key takeaways. The global economic power dynamics are undergoing a significant shift, with China emerging as a serious economic competitor to the United States for the first time in a century. According to Richard Wolff, the numbers are telling. The U.S. GDP stands at approximately $25 trillion, while China's GDP has reached $18 trillion. In contrast, Russia's GDP is only $2 trillion, making it economically far less significant on the global stage. Wolff points out that China has achieved technological parity with the U.S. in many areas, and is even leading in some sectors. This represents a fundamental change from the post-World War era of clear U.S. economic dominance that followed the decline of the British Empire. The shift suggests we're entering a new multipolar world order, which could significantly impact global financial markets and investment strategies. He highlights geopolitical risks, particularly regarding potential conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, which could have severe implications for global financial stability. Wolff argues that these regional conflicts, combined with the decline of U.S. hegemony, create a potentially volatile environment that could affect global markets and economic stability. The narrative suggests that the future economic landscape will likely be multipolar rather than dominated by a single superpower, which could require new approaches to international trade, currency markets, and global financial governance.